Good afternoon, good morning to those on the call. Thank you for joining us. We are going to get started in about 2 minutes. This is the Northern Plains drought update and fire update and a few other things. So hold on. We'll get started here in about a minute or two. I'm going to let the rest of the people who want to get on. So stand by. Brett, it's *6 to mute, just in case you want to make noise. Oh, I guess this is recording. I can't quite tell. All right. Okay, good afternoon again. This is Doug Cluck. I work for NOAA, National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, based in Kansas City, Missouri in this case. Today we're having a, if you will, special webinar due to the conditions, drought conditions, mainly dry conditions up in the Northern Plains. You know where that is if you live there, and I imagine there are a number of folks on the call from that region. So the way we're going to do this is we're going to have our first speaker, who's Laura Edwards, who is the South Dakota State Climatologist, give us a climate and drought update in terms of how we got to this point and a little bit about the outlooks into the future. And then we're going to transition to Colleen Haskell with the Northern Rockies, GAC, which I can't remember what the acronym stands for, but she'll tell us. And then finally, we're going to have Britt Parker from NIDIS, National Integrated Drought Information System, tell us a little bit about how one can input their impacts for drought that is used by the folks like the Drought Monitor, people to draw the maps that they do on a weekly basis. So all that's really important information. And if you have questions as we go, because we're all muted, or you'll all be muted, if you have questions as we go, there is a question section in the interface there for the webinar. We hope you can write your questions in there as we go. I can direct those, and we can answer them at the end. And so we'll have a little Q&A session, if you will, when the speakers have finished. So why don't we go ahead and start? Hopefully I haven't forgotten anything else. We'll start with Laura, and hopefully you see her screen. And go ahead, Laura.
All right, great. Thanks, Doug. Yeah, I'm a state climatologist of South Dakota. I'm based out of the Aberdeen Regional Extension Office, and I work for SDSU Extension. And so I'll be covering the multi-state region, not just South Dakota, kind of the climate information on where we are, kind of how we got here, and maybe a little look in the crystal ball on where we're headed. So I'll hop into it here. First of all, our USDA equal opportunity information for the record for you guys. Okay, here we are at the U.S. Drought Monitor, and I'm guessing many or all of you have been keeping an eye on this, as I know it has a lot of impact and a lot of interest from people across the region. And certainly you see our region stick out very clearly in the red with the D3 extreme drought area in the Montana and Dakotas region. Certainly we're not the only ones dealing with drought right now, but this has ramped up very quickly, as a year ago there was essentially no color anywhere in our region. And so things have changed quite dramatically in the last year, even last 9 months. Here's just a zoom up look at the Drought Monitor, and this map is published every Thursday morning, so it does update every week, all year round, not just in the growing season. So we will be focusing mostly on Montana and the Dakotas for this presentation here today, but we'll try to touch on neighboring states as well, as we have some information about that. And so you can see kind of the statistics on the right-hand side of the screen here, looking at currently we have about, in this 6-state region, just less than a quarter of the area in D3 or D4 level drought. That's like 1 in 5 year, 1 in 3 year kind of drought, or sorry, 3 to 5 times, maybe 3 times per century kind of drought. So really quite severe when you're looking at D3 to D4 level. My apologies, this comes out a little blurry. This is how it was downloaded from NOAA this morning, but they did just update their climate data through April. And so looking at the last 6 months, November through April, you see here's this precipitation and how each county is ranked out of 126 years of record. The very dark browns that you see up in eastern Montana, North Dakota, are record driest for that November through April periods, for that 6-month period. And we see this everywhere in that 4 to 6 month kind of range. So it's pretty solid as far as the data goes up in that part of the region. Again, this is from NOAA's, from their Climate at a Glance website, if you want to ever dig in deeper into that data. Looking a little closer here, just in our region, in the High Plains, Northern Plains region, for the year to date, this is precipitation percent of normal since January 1st. And this really just emphasizes that story that we've got areas that are less than 25% of average for the year so far, for the first 4 months of the year. And a very tight gradient, I would say, very small, short distance between some of the very tough areas and some of the wetter areas, maybe as little as 100 miles between what might be a D3 drought area and no drought, or maybe just dry area, D0 abnormally dry. So we're seeing some tight pockets of wet and dry, not too far apart in our region right now. Look at the temperature side of things. I know temperature sometimes is overlooked in drought, but when you have warm temperatures, it really can exacerbate or make worse a drought situation just with precipitation shortage alone. And looking at the last 6 months, temperature certainly has been a factor, which seems kind of funny to think about in the wintertime, but we saw quite a large expansion and increase in severity in drought over the winter season. So temperature did play a role as far as, increasing evaporation and both from surface water and from soils, and kind of losing that ability to hold moisture in the landscape or on the surface. Certainly recently we've seen kind of a cooler trend lately, but over the last 6 months we've been in the top 10% warmest of the 126 years on record for November through April. And here again, just looking at a close-up of the region, and just since January 1st, since the beginning of this calendar year, you do see that warmth playing a role again in that same drought area in the eastern Montana and Dakotas region. Has been cooler than average in nearby Wyoming, you know, western Nebraska and those areas, but that's, you know, but with the precipitation deficit we've seen a little bit, we have seen drought in that area, although there has been a little improvement over the last few weeks or so. Looking at soil moisture, that is one of the one of the first indicators that we look at typically this time of year as vegetation's just coming out of dormancy. Soil's thawed, you know, in April, and so whatever moisture is there is kind of our bank account, is the way I put it, kind of our reserves for when we have the heat and dry conditions. That's what especially on the agriculture side of things. And, you know, we're looking at near record driest as far as soil moisture goes up in North Dakota, Montana, and parts of western parts of Wyoming and Montana as well. You know, recently we've been a little bit fortunate with some rain in April in South Dakota, and the cool temperatures have been able to hold that moisture in place. So we're a little bit near average for much of South Dakota now, but that can change in a hurry now as we get into the growing season. And I know crops are being seeded, planted, vegetation is perking up and coming out of dormancy. So soil moisture might not last long as we get into that growing season a little deeper. Another way to look at soil moisture is using what we call our Mesonet network, our weather station network across the upper Missouri River Basin. And this is a multi-state project with the Mesonets, the weather station networks from 5 different states collaborating. And they have this, what we call the poker chip map, looking at soil moisture sensors at various depths. And each network uses different depths for some of their sensors. They are looking to standardize that as we go forward the next few years. But you can see the greens and blues are a little bit near average to wetter. But there's a lot of oranges and yellows out there that are looking at pretty dry conditions for this time of year. Now, looking at the agriculture impacts for a little bit here, I'll show just a couple of these maps, and these are from USDA. The red hatched area are D1 or worse on the Drought Monitor map this week. So you can see the drought areas, and they overlay that with the crop growing areas for different commodities. So in this case, I'm looking at sunflower because we're right in the heart of sunflower country up here. And dark green are the major growing areas, light green are the minor growing areas for that crop. And you can see essentially, you know, almost all the major sunflower growing areas are in some level of drought, according to the Drought Monitor. We can kind of cross that with each state and how severe are they in drought in this sunflower growing region. Starting from the left, you see South Dakota and North Dakota there. South Dakota, looking at the top of that bar, 86% of South Dakota's sunflower growing area is in some level of drought. To further divide that, 21% is in D3 level, 37% in D2 level, 28% in D1 level. So you read it like that. In North Dakota, you know, essentially all the sunflower growing regions in some level of drought, but really much severe drought of 93% of their sunflower production area in drought. So in D3 level drought. So you can read it like that. So it's not just that the areas in drought, it's in pretty deep drought at this point. Another similar crop that's grown up in this north central region and Northern Plains region, spring wheat. I know even some producers up in the northern part of South Dakota chose not to plant because of extremely dry conditions. So certainly this is going to have a major impact as well, the drought situation on this crop as well on crop production. So the shortage of moisture at this point can affect emergence and survivability of the crop as we go through the growing season. So a lot of concerns here, I'd say, for sunflower, spring wheat, and other similar crops. I won't go into all the other commodities except to mention pasture and range condition now is being reported. That starts May 1st of each year. And thanks to Brad Rippey at USDA who shared these graphs with us. Currently now, as we're starting off the 2021 season, about 47%, this is nationally now, not just in the Northern Plains, but nationally 47% of pasture and range is ranking in the very poor to poor range. In 2013, as a comparison, that would be coming out of the 2012 drought, about 36% was in poor to very poor condition. So that gives you some perspective on that left side. You see that one red dot, that's where 2021 is. Gives you some perspective of how we're starting out the season this year. And I've heard a lot of other concerns on, on water supply, water quality for livestock. Also is very poor across the region. I know a lot of the extension offices in North Dakota and South Dakota at least do a quick test for total dissolved solids and are coming back pretty high numbers. So a lot of concern, I'd say, on the agriculture side already, even though we're just in the first week of May. Looking ahead, I see a little room for optimism, at least in the short term. This is the 7-day total precipitation forecast. And it doesn't look really like one big gully washer, so to speak, in the next 7 days, but a handful of small systems coming through, bringing some late to moderate rains, perhaps, across the Northern Plains drought region. So what I think this can offer is a little bit of short-term relief, at least. But, you know, we're in this wettest time of year for many of us in the region is this time right now, and we really need this to be a really more consistent pattern for us to see substantial improvement. Looking out, again, the 6 to 10 day outlook, this is from NOAA's Climate Prediction Center, updated yesterday afternoon. You know, we're kind of in the middle here in the Northern Plains. Temperature on the left side, most likely near average temperatures for this time of year. No strong likelihood either cool or warm for that 6 to 10 day period. That'd be about a week from now. On the right, you do see a little bit of leaning towards drier conditions across Wyoming and nearby areas out that way. So southwestern South Dakota, part of western and southern Montana, and Nebraska. So we are keeping an eye on that. But as we look out further ahead, 1 to 2 weeks from now, 8 to 14 days from now, it does look like a potential for a little wetter pattern across at least most of Montana and the Dakotas and Nebraska. Along with that on the right, slightly more likely, slightly enhanced chance of warmer than average temperatures along with that. But again, it looks like kind of a typical May pattern here for the next 1 to 2 weeks. So crossing fingers, hopeful that we at least can hold off worsening drought conditions, if not get a little bit of improvement. But we, like I said, we're in a deep hole in a lot of those drought areas right now. The May outlook that was released just a week ago from NOAA's Climate Prediction Center as well shows, again, uncertainty a lot in the temperature and precipitation outlook in this Northern Plains region. In northern, northwestern Montana, slightly enhanced chance of wetter than average conditions. And, you know, equal chances is the EC, equal chances of above, below, or near average for most of it, both on temperature and precipitation. So again, I think there is a lot of uncertainty if there would be a pattern, big shift in the middle of the month. And as I just showed you, just over the next 1 to 2 weeks, looks not strong likelihood of one way or the other at this point. The concern I have here is looking out further ahead, June through August, and we've seen this pretty consistent in the outlooks from NOAA's Climate Prediction Center over the last few months, where they've been leaning towards warmer than average for mid to late summer, also drier than average likelihood on the right side. You see that for much of the Northern Plains and Pacific Northwest. So this is where I have a little more concern, in that even if we get some short-term relief, that midsummer, we could see a return of drought or prolonged consistent drought conditions hang in there through the midsummer. One outcome of this is looking at runoff from the upper Missouri River Basin. So this is the Missouri River Basin above Sioux City, Iowa. And just yesterday, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers updated their outlook for the 2021 annual runoff. And you see there the red bar on the far right, looking at below average runoff expected for this calendar year, the lowest that they've seen since the late 2000s. So we've had quite a run of some wet periods, and they're looking at a lower forecast even than what they expected a month ago. So as of yesterday, they said 17.8 million acre feet is what they're expecting total for the year. That's down 3.5 million acre feet from just a month ago. If this does verify, if it does come in at 17.8, that would be the 22nd lowest in their period of record, which is, again, over about 125 years. They did mention yesterday also, at least in their news release, that they caution that those who have water intake on the river to prepare for that potential low water conditions and potentially reduced intake, depending where you're at and how things play out here this season. So there's a link there to their news release that mentions that. So there's a potential future impact coming down the road that they're trying to share with folks. So a quick summary here, just on my section, looks like potential short-term relief, or at least not worsening of drought for the near term, with a more active weather pattern and maybe more moderate temperatures more likely the next 1, maybe 2 weeks. We've already seen some areas of record dry conditions over the last 4 to 6 months. That's leading us to this lack of soil moisture to buffer against any future shortages of precipitation as we get into that warm season, the growing season. And as I've mentioned, we really need a steady wet pattern to really get some significant drought recovery. And one of my concerns is that the summer outlook does not look optimistic necessarily. And I'm holding quite a bit of concern for that prolonged drought condition in the coming months. Impacts on agriculture are already out there. We're starting to see it in fire, which the next presenter will talk about, and potentially water supply. So keep an eye out and I think this is the time to be aware and make your preparations and plans now in case things do not improve. We hope they do, but I think this is time now to make some preparations. So with that, here's my contact information, and Doug, I'll pass it back to you.
Hey, thank you, Laura. Hey, one question that often comes up, I'm not sure it's come up yet, is what would it take to get out of this drought? And I know it's hard to answer that exactly for everybody's backyard, but you've already mentioned kind of a series of wet, relatively wet storms over this time period would be very helpful. Feel free to address that. The other thing would be if we Yeah, so this is you also said this is our rainy time of the year. When do we come out of our rainy time of year? In other words, how long should typically, climatologically, do we see this rainy period last? And yeah, well, why don't we just talk about those couple things?
Okay, I'll answer the second question first. So our rainy period up here in the Northern Plains is typically probably about mid-April to about mid-July, early July. So we're right in the heart of it. May, June are often the wettest months of the year. But that being said, to your first question, how much rain does it take to get out of a drought? Well, I think some impacts are already locked in to some degree. Going back to last fall and already this spring, those dry conditions have already, I would say, limited our potential grass and pasture productivity, I think already. And I think too, so how much rain? If you're in a less severe drought area, some timely rains can carry us through. And I don't think you need necessarily above average rainfall to get through with kind of minimal impact. But those areas in that D3 area or worse, I think need a little more than just timely rains at this point to carry them up through the season.
And to rebuild the soil moisture, that's just not going to happen during these months, right? Is it just take too much water during this time of deficits?
Yeah, that's the point. Yeah. So, and warmer temperatures make it worse because that warmer temperatures encourages more rapid plant growth, more water and evaporation, and just more water demand in general by plants and animals alike. So yeah, I think it's going to take a little more than rainfall, and cooler temperatures would help if we could have that.
Yep. Okay, well, thank you, Laura. And I have finally figured out to say where Colleen comes from. She yeah, well, she's talking about the Northern Rockies Coordination Center, and she can tell you a little bit where they are and what they do. Thank you, Laura. Shifting over to Colleen. Colleen's going to tell us a little bit more about fire issues that we may be up against, and already have been up against, I should say, and may see in the future. So, Colleen, please take it away.
Thank you, Doug. Good afternoon, everybody. As Doug mentioned, I am with the Northern Rockies Coordination Center, and that includes central Idaho northward and includes Montana and North Dakota, and a small piece of South Dakota in the northwest part of the state. And as you mentioned, we're in a continuum of what really started last September with a series of severe wind events and dry fuels and in this drought. Just to piggyback on the last question, as far as rain amounts go, as we head into summer, those thunderstorms, while they feel like they're producing a lot of rain, it's very spotty. What we really need are those nice stratiform, long duration rainfalls where we have more residence time and wider coverage. So yeah, the outlooks that Laura showed for this summer, like she said, it's kind of a wish cast that we are hoping that we get to take the edge off here. Anyway, I wanted to start by looking at some of those factors that preset our predictability of wildland fire season, and I put that in quotes because when we're assessing a fire season outlook, now we're looking at more of a fire year, as you know. And these are some of the factors that influence our decision making, starting with the lower right-hand corner. And this year, what we had in the fall and the beginning of the water year and over the winter with the drought conditions that Laura presented, that's really the highest weighted factor that we're looking at least east of the Continental Divide. So I'll address some of these factors as I go through here, but I wanted to put some emphasis on the pre-existing conditions and some of the fire activity that we've already seen during what's typically known as a shoulder season. You know, shoulder season being once we get the season-ending events in August and September typically, that really was the start of our fire season in eastern Montana and North Dakota. So that became very evident when we saw the fire starts and the wind events that coupled together for large fire growth, including the Windy Fire, which started in North Dakota and then spread across state lines into South Dakota, 15,000 acres there. Then we had the Horse Pasture Fire in April on the Little Missouri grasslands. And most recently, just this last week, we had the Roosevelt Creek Fire. And these are just a couple examples of many of our large fires that we've seen most recently. So far since January, just in the Northern Rockies, so while the GAC does include Montana and North Dakota, you know, this is representative of the much larger Northern Plains area, including parts of Wyoming and into South Dakota. So you're not going to see those numbers for South Dakota necessarily because I'm only showing you the Northern Rockies. But just so far this year, we've seen over 61,000 acres of wildfire burn and 835 wildfires. So this doesn't include any of the prescribed burns. The other thing I wanted to show you on this is the number of human starts and acreage on the left here on the bottom compared to the lightning starts. These are almost exclusively human starts due to farm equipment, agricultural burns that got out on windy days, even some arsons. So most of the fires that we've had almost completely are from human starts. So that tells me we have opportunity for preventive messages too. So as an example, let's just take a look at North Dakota so far since January 1st, which was really in the middle of the start of the water year. And we've seen nearly 3 times the annual average. You know, so we're only a few months into the year and we've seen 3 times the annual. So on the plains, we have what's called a bimodal fire season. So we typically see those dry, windy days on the freeze-dried fuels in February and March, and then we get a secondary peak after we've seen the fuels curing, or like Laura was mentioning, once we get into the hottest and driest time of the year before harvest, so August, September, and that's where we're concerned. You know, is we've already seen this for the first part of the bimodal year, and we're anticipating that we will see the secondary peak in late summer and early fall. Okay, so while we showed that we did get those warm temperatures for what we've seen from the water year, October 1st to present, the fly in the ointment was the polar plunge, right? So in mid-February, we did see from the North Pole, we got all that cold air that came down through central Montana, and on the right, you can see the mean anomaly for the month of February. Those bright purple spots continued all the way down to the Gulf Coast. And while that did offer a cool down briefly, what it ended up doing was freeze drying, or taking all the moisture and evaporating all of that out of the fuels that were standing dead. So if we couple that period where it had an impact on the standing grass from last season's crops, and we couple that with the precipitation anomalies that she already showed us, what we are seeing here on the left is for this year, February through April, compared to what we had last year. So 2 years back to back of very dry conditions. That was something that also contributed to what we're seeing in terms of the quality of the fuels that are existing on the landscape right now. So in a weather sense, one of the biggest trends that we've seen is a higher frequency and a wider coverage area of the downsloping Chinook winds. And so while we did get a few snow events, the biggest one was in late October. So it's been quite a while. East of the Continental Divide here in central Montana eastward, through the Dakotas and into eastern Wyoming. What it did is essentially melted any of the snow that fell, and we didn't get a compression of the grass that was standing from last fall. So in a sense, we're carrying over all of the production that we had from last year. We're putting wind on it and taking the moisture away from that grass. And then we had the freeze-dried event that occurred in mid-February for 2 weeks. So as you know, we are all looking at a very familiar landscape of what that does to the grasses. You know, very patchy snowpack east of the Continental Divide this year. And here's an example of Great Falls, Montana, in the central part of the state. So not only did it remain dry, but the wind quickly removed any of the snow that we were counting on as our bank account, as Laura well stated. So those snow-free fuels east of the divide are now adding to the production, are adding to the component of our rangeland fuels. Here I'm showing an example from the most recent Fuelcast. He did a podcast on the 1st of May, and you can check out all of the updates here at fuelcast.net by Dr. Matt Reeves. And so while we're not expecting much production this spring and summer, in fact, his forecast model is showing that for the Dakotas and into Nebraska, we're looking for about 1,100 pounds per acre. We're contributing an excess of carryover from last year. So while our moisture bank account is in a deficit, our fuels bank account is in excess. So we have more grass to add to the fire. So 1,600 pounds per acre, in fact. So if we couple those together, the model from Fuelcast is showing about 2,700 pounds per acre. So that abundance of fuels is something that we consider when we're looking at the prediction going forward into what's late spring and into early summer for our core fire season. Another thing that we look at are the trends in terms of the green up conditions, and NASA's Worldview gives us a nice animated look at that. Most recently, the rain that we did get in late April and into early May, we did see in the James River Valley, we did see some green up. It's trying, but it's very anemic. I'll just say that. So the surface moisture conditions have improved somewhat, but it's so dry deep down. Some of the quotes that I got from a recent phone call, tapping into some of the local anecdotal observations, are that even the weeds are slow to come in. You know, our conditions are looking more like August than May, and green up really can't make up its mind. So I could compare this to what we saw last year or the previous year, where we had green up, you know, that we're not only is it not very widespread, but it's also delayed. So I think this is something that you all know more, you're more familiar with than I am. Now, I will say that with the anticipated precipitation over the next 7 days that Laura showed, there is some hope for improvement. And largely that's what the May fire potential outlook is hanging on, is basically being hopeful for more moisture and some green up based on the trends that we saw with the little input that we got over the last several weeks. Okay, and those cooler temperatures that we had in February that I mentioned with the polar plunge, and then again in April, they really didn't significantly improve any of the fuels conditions. If anything, that made it worse in many areas by freezing it. And here we're looking at just a 90-day anomaly of temperature. So central Montana, yes, cooler than average overall compared to what we saw last year as well. And I'll re-emphasize the drought conditions that Laura already showed. The most recent current conditions showing what we have in North Dakota into northwest South Dakota and into northeast Montana. We've seen also a trend spreading a little further west into central Montana, and I think that we will take the edge off of it with the next couple of weeks, but certainly it isn't going to erase anything. I also wanted to show this because in the fire community, we tap into shared resources. So crews, teams, and aircraft for one. We are sharing with the whole country and even internationally. So while we are in a drought for the last 9 months or so, the drought over the southwest quarter of the U.S. has been persistent for a couple of years, and their reservoirs are only running at about 30% at best. So this tells me in the bigger sense that we are going to be sharing a lot of the resources that we have and needing to really try to hang on to what we've got, because you know, that it's a much bigger picture than what we're experiencing in the Northern Plains. All right, so this leads us to what the Predictive Services fire potential outlook is for the months of May through August. And the reason I put the question mark on May is based on those short-term inputs and whether or not we do green up the fuels that we have. A lot of it also depends on the new ignitions that we get. So primarily not from lightning, but human causes. I put a question mark on August as well. Right now we're looking at normal potential based on looking at the warming and drying from the CPC outlooks. That could present a problem for that bimodal fire season. So that's something that we're going to take very seriously. But sandwiched in between there for June and July, if you looked very closely at the Climate Prediction Center outlooks for the Southwest United States, there is anticipated to be what's considered a normal Southwest monsoon. So the last 2 years we have seen a non-monsoon. We didn't get the Southwest moisture coming up through the Great Basin and into the Northern Rockies and the Northern Plains. So if we do, and this is something that we're kind of hanging our hat on, a normal monsoon would provide at least enough of near average thunderstorm activity for the Northern Rockies and the Northern Plains that we may be able to at least maintain an average or normal fire potential for those months and going into August. Now, that said, you can throw as much rain as you want on cured grass and it's not going to really help much. But that's something that we'll be considering as we move through the season. So I'll end with that, and I do have my contact information here, my email address and phone number.
Unmuted.
Welcome any questions today in the chat or afterwards, follow-up questions, and I really appreciate your time today. With that, I'll give it back to Doug.
Okay, thank you very much, Colleen. It was a good overview of the fire season and how we got to where we are, and I think people know things are burning. We did have a comment about, as of this morning, this comes from North Dakota, as of this morning, we're over 82,000 burned acres in due to wildfire, I should say, in North Dakota. Thank you, Miranda, for that comment.
Thank you.
Let's go, I guess I need to shift this over to Britt. There we go. Let's go to our last speaker. It's Britt Parker from the National Integrated Drought Information System, which is NIDIS to the rest of us inside the organization. And Britt,
Doug,
I'm waiting to see your.
Yes, so my computer is asking me to restart to give me permission. So I had sent you my presentation. Is there any way you can display it for me? And my apologies.
Oh. Yeah. Of course. We can work with this. That's
okay.
That's why we send these presentations around.
That's right. So I'm going to send it on the
correct screen
back to you. And I'll go ahead and get started because I know we're short on time. So I'll just start talking. So thank you for the opportunity to just chat a little bit about how to submit your drought observations. So my name is Britt Parker. I'm the Missouri River Basin Drought Information Coordinator with NIDIS, the National Integrated Drought Information System. And as a lot of times happens with these presentations, I'm relying heavily on the work of Kelly Smith at the National Drought Mitigation Center and Troy Blanford at the Montana State Library with the Water Information System, who have actually worked together. You'll see a lot of similarities. Montana did some really kind of ground-laying foundational work on upgrades to, the survey to submit your impacts that then Kelly with the Seymour system was able to learn from. So it's always good to learn from one another. So next slide, please.
Right.
So I'll go over quickly two systems: the Condition Monitoring Observing Report, Seymour, which is out of the National Drought Mitigation Center in partnership with NIDIS and the USDA. And then I'll also talk a little bit about the Montana Drought Reporter. And I just want to highlight that your reporting impacts helps us understand really how drought is affecting local conditions and you. And so state officials and the US Drought Monitor authors then have access to review these reports to help verify what indicators are showing and link them to impacts, as well as identify areas that might need more attention where perhaps station data may not be available. And you can also use these systems to check other impacts that have been reported in your area. Next slide. So I'll start with the Seymour system, and one of the cool updates this year is that it is now available on your mobile device. So to access the survey, and if you look in the chat box, my colleague Molly is going to type in a number of links for these different resources, but you can go to gounl.edu/Seymour, and you have the opportunity to open the survey in either your browser or in the Survey 123 Field app. And it's important to download the Survey 123 Field app first, continue without signing in, allow it to access your location and camera, and then go to that web link in your phone browser and it will link up with the app. Next slide. It's nice that you can choose a location. Right now the choices are Spanish or English, so you can do that by the drop-down menu in the upper right corner. You can also choose how to display your location. So it will give a very precise location, or you can, using the little X box there, select either your town or your city or your county, which also works for this purpose if you perhaps don't want to be so precise with your location information. Next slide. Then when you actually go in and start to work through the survey, you're going to be asked again about your location, and this is a quality assurance, quality control piece that's especially important for desktop and laptop users. You'll be asked to select a date. It will default to the current date, but if you're submitting an impact you saw yesterday or previously, you can always change that date. And then you'll be able to select on a 7-point wet to dry scale what the current conditions are. Next slide. Then you'll talk a little bit about your experience. How much experience do you have with conditions in your location? How many times in the past have you seen these types of conditions, as well as a few other questions? And that really helps relate your experience to the drought monitor levels. And then you get into the impacts. And so there's a wide array of types of impacts you can input, from production, livestock, crop, municipal water supply, hydropower, etc. And if you click on any of these, it's going to drill down and allow you to input more information, as well as have a text field to enter information. Next slide. Submitting photos. This is actually available in both of the systems that I'll talk about, and is one of the most important, I think, pieces of your impact report. If you can take a photo and upload, so you can take a photo and upload it, or upload one that's already in your phone or on your desktop. You can do up to 5 photos at the same time. And very importantly, we want to know, if this photo shows drought, then what does normal look like? Or better yet, upload a photo in non-drought conditions to contrast with, current conditions with normal. By uploading a photo, you do agree that it may be used or shared for educational and management purposes within the Seymour system. Next slide. And just to clarify, You will be able to select your role. Are you a producer, water supplier, extension, etc.? And that would be publicly visible. But your name and your email would only be visible to those who are involved in drought assessment so that they could reach back out to you with questions and follow-ups. So your personally identifying information will not be public. Next slide. You can then go back into the Seymour system and look at other people's or your own impact submission across many different sectors and look at photos and other information. Next slide. And then just moving quickly to the Montana Impact Reporter. So Montana does have its own system and you could choose to use either. And you can report much like the Seymour system. As I said, the development was quite integral across both systems. You can report on moisture conditions in your area. This system was launched in mid-2017 and is an ongoing effort. There's a link there to how to submit your reports, and that will be in the chat box. And much like Seymour, they're looking at how wet or dry it is, rating crop and range conditions, harvest status, also positive reports, so when it's more green or there's more water than usual. They also collect impacts for 7 different sectors listed here and also give the opportunity for descriptions and photos. Next slide. You can also go in using this web link and look at what types of impacts have been reported over the current year. Next slide. So very quickly, some best practices, which I think apply across these two systems. Report at least once a month or when conditions change. So consistent reporting kind of helps those using the information to build trust with you, to know that you're a trusted source of information who's submitting on a regular basis. Photos make the report more useful, providing context of how this is different than normal. Submitting both wet and dry conditions and including your contact info, which will not be public, will all make your impact report stronger. Next slide. So there are a lot of resources out there for both of these impact reporting systems. If you go to the web links, which again will be in the chat box for Seymour, there's fact sheets, outreach materials, there's a how-to video which will dive much more deeply into how to access the system, and you can look at the current maps of impacts. For Montana, there is a handout available for distribution at meetings and conferences. They're always looking for more reports and reporting regularly or when conditions change. Next slide. And here's my contact information. You're welcome to reach out, but also Kelly's for Seymour and Troy for Montana. And they're both very happy to work with you and to answer any questions. So thanks for a few minutes to talk about how to get your impact and condition monitoring into the system.
Okay, thank you, Britt. So I don't know if anybody on our panel has any comments they'd like to make. I'll get to a couple of the questions that I think pretty much answered. One was where did Laura get that photo? And I think she answered that, her opening slide. There was a comment also about soil moisture and how long it would take to get, if you will, a climatology to better understand how really dry soils are compared to normal. And that takes years normally. Laura, you can address that in just a minute. Whenever we put a new gauge of some sort to measure some sort of variable out there, sometimes it's to whatever normal is, because it's a new gauge and it's in a new place and we just don't have anything to relate to it. So it's important that we keep these gauges up and running for a number of years to track the climate. Laura, do you want to say any more about that?
Yeah, I think the question was about the quote poker chip map that I shared. And I may have misspoke if I said that was drier than average. That was actually, that's just a snapshot of what we call volumetric soil moisture, how much water is in the soil just today. But yeah, you're right, especially for soils, it takes a long time for the soil, I call it to settle. You know, because you're disturbing the soil to install the sensor. And so you need kind of a time for it to equilibrate in a sense there. And as far as calibrating the soil type to the moisture numbers we're getting, not all the states have had soil samples taken at their sensor locations, at their weather station locations. So we don't have that calibration across the whole network. We're not showing that right now.
Okay. Just a couple other comments about, there were a couple more comments about other areas that had burned. Fort Berthold Reservation, for example, had 9,800 acre fire. And I think I already mentioned what Miranda said about North Dakota having 82,000 fully across the entire state. Okay, and one comment about Seymour, the thing that Britt just, the drought impact reporting mechanism is that it works best with Chrome, according to our good friends in North Dakota as well. Molly or Britt, would you like to say anything about upcoming information that we may or will be doing? The only thing I'll say from my point of view is that based upon how this drought unfolds, in my mind, it's likely that we're going to have impacts for quite a while, especially in the worst areas for drought. And it is likely that we'll continue some sort of series of informational, either webinars or emails and all that kind of stuff. But I since Britt and Molly are part of the National Integrated Drought Information System, I think they may want to comment on upcoming or future ideas that we're open to those, by the way. So any of us can take an email from you too, in terms of what we should be concentrating on, what speakers you'd like to hear. Yeah, so we have some things in the works, but Britt and Molly, go ahead.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Doug. Can you hear me? This is Molly.
Yep.
Oh, you can? Okay, great. Yeah, so just building off of what was presented today for the webinar, NIDIS will be sending out a drought status update early next week based on this webinar and the recording. So that will be shareable with others if you're interested. And we also are planning to coordinate a tribal focused webinar where we can hear from tribal partners and also do something similar in terms of providing an update of conditions. So we are in the process of planning that right now for probably late May or early June. Beyond that, I definitely, as Doug said, we would be interested in hearing if there is something that would be particularly useful to you, more information that you need around the drought, anything like that. Please reach out to any of us, really, any of the presenters, but Britt and I or Doug would love to hear if there are other things that you need in terms of help with the drought information. So yeah, I don't know, Britt, if you have anything to add. We can't hear you if you, meant.
Oh, sorry, I just, two places to unmute. No, I think you covered everything. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thanks, Doug.
Okay, yeah, and so I guess we'll leave it at that. There are a number of resources across this region, whether you know it or not, NIDIS and USDA, obviously NOAA, and National Drought Mitigation Center and each one of your states are doing a great job of getting information out already. So hats off to all of you. Let's go ahead and end this. I think we're at the top of the hour. So I want to thank everybody else who spoke and all of those who got on here, and we look forward to another one of these. I will advertise very quickly, if you're not aware, we do a monthly broadly regional webinar, but that covers a much broader area. We talk about a lot of things, not so focused on the Northern Plains, although we will talk about it and give the latest updates in terms of outlooks. That one's coming up on the 20th, May 20th at 1 p.m. Central Daylight Time. And if you don't have a link to that, email me, doug.cluck, K-L-U-C-K, @noaa.gov, and I will, or Britt, or any of these people, and we will get you a link to that webinar series as well. That's once a month, every month, no matter what's going on, but it covers kind of a Great Lakes to Rockies area too. On that note, I'm going to say thanks again and have a great weekend, and let it rain.